right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our viewers wherever you are joining us from. And this is your program again, ICAN-ngr. Of course, the first edition in the month of March. So it will be out of order for me to welcome you into the month of March. And today we are looking at the topic, building economic resilience, opportunities in the Agric Value Chain. And of course, we have today in person of Olatunji Abioye, who is the Chief Executive Officer of 365 Farms. And he'll be talking to us about all relevant opportunities that we have in the Agric Value Chain. Wherever you are, please tell your colleagues, tell your friends, tell your neighbors that the show has begun, ICAN-ngr, and that you can be part of that program around every social media handles of the Institute, be it Facebook, be it YouTube, LinkedIn, X, Instagram. Join through all of these social media handles and let us roll together on this program. Today, March 5th, 2026, like I said earlier, we are looking at opportunities in the Agric Value Chain. Let's learn together from, of course, the versatile CEO regarding opportunities in the Agric Value Chain. Let's really go and take some commercials. I'll be right back in the studio with my guest in the house. Don't go away. I'll be right back.
He knows what it takes to succeed.
She has the skill to move financial mountains.
So can you with ICAN and the CGMA designation.
She has the confidence to lead finance in Nigeria.
He's ready to become a finance leader.
So can you with ICAN and the CGMA designation.
All right, welcome back to your program, my program, our program, ICAN-ngr. And of course, look at who we have in the house today, Mr. Olatunji Abioye, the CEO of 365 Farms. You're welcome to ICAN-ngr, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tosin.
It's a pleasure having you on the show. Of course, today again, I'm also not anchoring this show alone. I'm anchoring with Okemute Tejere, FCA. I'm sure you guys have been mentioning, can we see a female anchor to also co-anchor with our guys? Of course, we have listened to you, and now you have Tejere on the show. Tejere, you are welcome to ICAN-ngr.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tosi. I'm super delighted to be doing this with you. Thank you so much, and welcome to our global audience, distinguished professional colleagues. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Tosin Yakinwumi. And of course, ICAN-ngr is your program. And of course, we should actually take every benefit of this program, which the Institute has actually set before us. Without much ado, let's get to know our guests on the show today better. Tejere, let's get to know his profile.
All right. Thank you, Tosin. So our guest today, Mr. Olatunji Abioye, is the Chief Executive Officer and founding partner of 365 Farms Limited, and is rapidly emerging as one of Nigeria's leading agribusiness, focusing on the processing of agricultural products with the aim of propelling the Nigerian economy towards the next phase of industrialization. Our guest today has a BSc in chemical engineering from Texas A&M University and a master's degree from Robert Gordon University, Aberdeen, the United Kingdom. Mr. Abioye transitioned into the agricultural sector after an extensive career in the oil and gas industry. His prior experience includes roles as production facilities for several multinational corporations, including ConocoPhillips, Marathon Oil, and others. Through these roles, he develops core competencies in risk assessment, capital infrastructure planning, and project execution, which he now applies to large-scale farming operations. As Managing Director and CEO, Abioye leads the strategic direction for 365 Farms, which was established in 2019. His primary objectives include industrialization, mechanization, and sustainability. Distinguished professional colleagues, join me again in welcoming our guest today, Mr. Olatunji Abioye, CEO 365 Farms Limited.
Thank you very much, Tejuri, for that elaborate introduction.
You're so welcome.
You're welcome, Mr. Olatunji. Thank you very much. So let's go straight into the discussion for this evening: building economic resilience, opportunities in the Agric Value Chain, of which you play a major role in that space. In the words of Giver Tully, an American writer, also a speaker and also computer scientist, he said, and I quote, "Persistence and resilience only come from having been given the chance to work through difficult problems." What is resilience in general terms? What are its components? And what are the processes or the sacrifices that are required to build resilience as an individual, corporate body, or even as a nation?
Thank you very much, Mr. Tosin. Not to take too much time, when we talk about resilience, at least to my level of understanding, it's pretty much the ability to bounce back. That's in a very succinct way of putting it. To bounce back from some kind of trauma or adverse effect or adverse situation. So when we talk about the components of resilience, I'll take this from an individual perspective. And when we talk about components, we're talking about the typical components of competence, connection, character building. There are quite a few of them, but just to not exhaust the entire 7 or 8 list of components, I think I'll keep it at that. And when we talk about corporate resilience, while we do have quite a few, well-targeted components, I like to say the one I hold dear to my heart a lot is adaptability. That is, if I were to sum up the entire logic or concept of corporate resilience, I would say is more around adaptability, the ability to adapt. That's a very simple summary of what I'll call, corporate resilience. That's again from my own summary of all the psychological, psychological literatures out there. That's what I'll summarize it to be: the ability to adapt as a corporate body.
Okay, thank you so much for that response. As a country, I think we can all agree that Nigeria is in dire need of economic progress. And as citizens, Nigerians are going through economic hardship, regardless of what part of the spectrum you fall in. Will it be right to say that Nigerians lack resilience to succeed? Or is the Nigerian structure marrying resilience? Does it affect people's will to, or their ability to succeed? What do you say to that?
Well, that's a very interesting question, if you ask me. I'd say, first of all, I'd like to say that the average Nigerian is a very resourceful and resilient, I'd say, individual. At least most Nigerians, as a Nigerian myself, and most of my fellow countrymen and women that I've come across, they are some of the most resilient people I've actually met. Very resourceful and very mentally strong of dealing with different situations. So from that perspective, I'd say it's a bit of both, but I'll err more on the side of the fact that, while we do have all these qualities, all these nice qualities as Nigerians, the structural framework of the country sort of hindered us to be able to fulfill what I call, our individual abilities or goals, really, to maximize that. So I'd say it's more of a, without cheating very much, I'd say it's more of a corporate. There is an element of corporate. There's an element of structural framework that's lacking, that's sort of hindering our ability to grow as people or as a nation.
All right, thank you very much. Still in that line of this last question, talking about resilience and then the Agric Value Chain. As the CEO of one of Nigeria's leading agribusiness, what is economic resilience from the prism of Agric Value Chain, and how does it relate to Nigeria's current state of food security?
When we talk about economic resilience, again, I go back to one keyword I talk about is, I mentioned it earlier on. I like to sum up everything about resilience and from a corporate perspective to adaptability. One of the critical characteristics of being able to, when we say economic resilience, is ability for any individual or a body or even a country to be adaptable to different situations. So from our perspective, I'd say we have done a terrible job as a country to prepare ourselves for the challenges of the future. And when I was a kid, I'd say about 20 years ago, we always talked about the future. And 20 years later, I'd say the future is here. For my kids, or for your kids, for every one of our kids, the future is the next, 20, 25 years. And are we adaptable? Are we getting ourselves to a position where we are adaptable to the challenges of the next future? I don't think so. I think we're gradually getting there as a country, but as of right now, I don't think we're there yet. There's still a lot of work for us to do as a country to be able to build that economic resilience you're talking about. So I'll leave my answer at that, but I can speak a lot more around that economic resilience as regards to the agricultural value chain. But that's I can literally write you a thesis about that, but not to take too much of your time. I'll keep my answer short and sweet.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're just going to go to that directly, the agri value chain. So when most people think about agriculture, the first thing that comes to their mind is farming. So please, can you help us break down the agric value chain, especially for our global audience? And do you realistically think that agriculture can compete with the black gold of Nigeria in terms of GDP contribution, and foreign exchange earnings? What's your take on that, Mr. Abioye?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. Well, I guess I'll speak from both sides of my mouth here, because as an ex-oil professional and now oil professional turned farmer is what most folks would say. But first of all, I'll take the first level of the question. The agribusiness extends way beyond just farming. If you really think about it, if you look at the way we have the agricultural program set, even starting from colleges, right? It engages engineers, scientists. There's a whole framework around, accounting. As a matter of fact, one of the critical areas that I think is lacking, is the understanding of agric finance, all the way down to agric taxes, right? So there's a host of value chain, a host of businesses or support functions that actually surrounds the agribusiness. So when we compare, or maybe I like to compare the oil and gas and the agric value chain. I think they are very much alike, in terms of how they're set up. In the upstream, in the oil and gas section, we talk about the upstream, the downstream, and the midstream, really, which the upstream is where you drill the wells, the midstream is where you transport the wells, and the downstream is where you actually process the wells. So when you really think about oil as a commodity, every single agric product, from food, cassava, rice, maize, they are all commodities, just like oil and gas. So when you think about it, each of these components or each of these products, they have their own individual value chains as well. For example, maize farming, right? Maize farming would be your upstream. Maize logistics and transportation and storage of these maize products would be your midstream, and your processing of the maize into a finished product would be your downstream, right? So when you think about it, they're very much alike. And when you talk about if we can compete in terms of foreign exchange, I think anything else, I think is actually very, very. It's much of a stronger competitor than oil and gas. When you think about it, there are countries like, for example, Belgium. You take Belgium and Holland, for example. Those countries do not have any oil and gas. They are some of the world's strongest economies. They do have really strong footholds in agriculture. I think the Dutch are known for dairy product and dairy imports. They are probably one of the biggest ones actually out there in the world. You talk about, I'd say I took a trip to Singapore, and also took a trip and did a road trip to Malaysia. And we drove about 300 kilometers. Driving from Malaysia to Singapore, everything you see between that 300 kilometers is planting of oil palm and coconut trees. That's a very intentional country, and those countries do not have oil and gas, but they are some of the largest producers of or exporters of palm oil and nut products. So when you really think about it, every agricultural product is like an oil and gas component. Pretty much, you have maize just like oil and gas, cassava is like oil and gas. It just depends on how or what you make of each of those products. So can they compete with foreign exchange? Yes. The population is growing. You think about it, the population is growing, and everybody needs to eat. One of the most sustainable business that I've actually ever invested in is agriculture. No matter what happens, everybody has to eat. And not just that, that's the simplest way you really think about it. There's a lot of agri products that are also feedstock to many industrial products. For example, I'd say your starch, right? Your starch is made from cassava. Starch is in practically everything we eat. It's made of in your soda, your Indomie noodles, right? That's the thing, right? That's Indomie, right? If you really want to do a little research, you can take a piece of your Indomie noodles you consume, and you see some starch produced out of it. It comes from cassava starch. And so there's quite a few of that. And when you think about the amount of that, this kind of products we consume, you realize how much opportunities, there are in the agribusiness, and the lack of our knowledge, or I guess our investment in that space. So I know I've given a long-winded answer, but if the short answer is yes, the agribusiness can compete with oil and gas. That's a very basic answer.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that detailed response regarding that question. Nigeria as a country is actually blessed, and I'm sure you agree with me, especially with huge arable lands. We have rain in due season and all of that. So if I put it to you, sir, is there any justification for Nigeria to be massively importing food and other agricultural products, despite all of these resources that we have at our disposal? And at which point of the agricultural value chain, is it the production, is it the storage, is it the processing or the distribution stage, that we actually lose focus and resilience?
That's a very loaded question, actually. So when you think about, us as a country, I think what's the population is just above 200 million people. And you think about the amount of land that requires to feed that amount of people, right? And I think it would be an unfair statement to say that we should not import food. We're going to have to do some import. That's a very realistic, that's a very factual answer. We have to import some things. Our arable lands are not good enough to plant everything that we'd like to consume. However, the amount of land size we have is enough to actually cultivate more than 50% of what we do consume. When you really think about the staple foods we actually do consume, which is your gari and your rice and beans and yams, right? Those staple foods would probably be, will probably occupy about 50% or 30% of what arable lands we do have. However, I'd say the very exotic foods like strawberries and apples and things like that, that's really not as as conducive to our own land in terms of growth. Those are things you end up import. So I'd say it's more of a 50-50 type deal where we actually produce more of what we consume and the rest 50% is probably imported. It's and also it supports world trade. It's a very simplistic view to think that we do not or we would not import some food at some point. Again, as the population keeps growing and some of the security challenges we've had lately, and I'm sure everybody's well aware of that, it's probably driving us towards the environment where we have to import some things. So in today's world, yes, we do have to import something. And I missed the other part of the question. I kind of lost the other part of the question, Mr. Tosin, but if you don't mind.
Okay, so the other part is saying that at which particular point did we lose focus of the agri value chain? Did we lose the focus? Is it at the production stage? Is it at the storage stage? Is it at the distribution stage? At which exact particular point did we actually lose focus?
Okay, yeah. So on the focus side, I think holistically speaking, I don't think we've actually arrived anywhere. Holistic speaking, right? I don't think we've truly ever. I don't think we've truly cultivated or maximized our potential in cultivation. I think the storage and the midstream, what I call the midstream piece of it, which is your storage and logistics piece, is largely missing. And I think the processing part of the business, which I call the industrialization piece, that's highly underinvested in. So it's not a specific space where we actually lost focus. It's just that the entire agri value chain in Nigeria is underdeveloped, and the sector could use a lot more investors and more interest. Actually, I'll call it interest. Could use a lot more interest and investors in that space. So there are I guess my point is that there are opportunities to grow each sector of what we call the agri value chain, which is what I call the midstream, the downstream, and the upstream.
Okay, thank you so much for that interesting answer. I can't help but be intrigued by the radical shifts from the oil and gas sector to the agri sector. So clearly you saw something. So would you please just run our global viewers through some of those opportunities you've seen in the agri value chain? I mean, in what ways can agriculture, like practically and realistically, reduce unemployment and even this rural urban migration? Can you share some of those opportunities you saw that made you do that switch?
Okay. Thanks for asking that question. I get that question every time. So the biggest driver for me was it's more of a sense of responsibility. There are two things that drive investments. It's the fact that you genuinely want to create value, and of course the opportunity that you see in them. For me, the overwhelming one was more of the sense of responsibility. That was more overwhelming for me, and for my partners. Like I said earlier on, the oil and gas and the agri value chain are very, very much alike. They are just commodities. And when you really think about Nigerian space, as we see rapid inflation and rapid growth of population, you realize that there's always going to be a need for us to maintain that demand, or maybe if you want to call it supply, depends on how you look at the equation. But my biggest driver again is more of a personal value driven one, and I'm also a process engineer by background, meaning that it's one area in which I feel like we as a we as a team, myself and my team, we create the best value in terms of ensuring that the farmers are not seeing a lot of their produce go to waste. So that's more, like I said, is more of a big sense of responsibility for me. It's something I call my retirement plan. That's what I call my retirement plan. Of course, I've had to start it a little earlier in my career, but yeah, that's the main reason why I did. And I think I made the shift, and same for some of my partners as well. It's mostly driven by a sense of responsibility. Opportunities wise, like I said, the other part of my answer is that there's quite a few opportunities in Agric. And from an employment perspective, I do feel like if we as a country become more intentional about agriculture, we could see as much as 20 to 30% of the population, of the unemployed population, employed. And like I talked about, there is a lot of opportunities for engineers. We lack enough of them, but we don't have enough of them. And the engineers we do have don't want to go and they really don't want to practice agricultural engineering. So there are opportunities for a lot of scientists. Like I talked about, one of the areas where we struggle with is agricultural taxes. I mean, understanding how that, there's a big challenge. That was one of our biggest challenges about 5 years ago when we really first started, doing large scale production, was we just didn't understand the international accounting standards and how to interpret it as against in relation to Nigerian law. So that's one sector that is underserved. When you talk about opportunities there, right? So and I try to encourage the young accountants that I've worked in the past and saying, look, if you do specialize in this area, I mean, there is a ton of us, that really we do struggle with it. We do struggle with understanding how the Nigerian tax laws interprets things like biological assets. I've had to pick up the international agri standards myself to try to interpret it myself, work with my accountants. So there's, and that's how it relates to you guys. You find accountants that I'm talking to today. That's how that relates to you. Again, there are opportunities for engineers, there are opportunities for just about everybody in the agri space. So when we talk about employment opportunities, I really do think if we become intentional as a country with developing the agribusiness, you'd see our employment go down 20-30% as a country.
Of course, obviously, if you had not seen some opportunities in the agri space, you would not leave the oil and gas and then chase that opportunity that lies in the agri chain. I'm sure I'm correct. I want to believe I'm correct.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Of course. Okay, still in the agri chain, because we are talking about the opportunities in the Agric value chain. Agric, like other enterprises, will require capital for establishment, for sustenance and all that. Why do you think banks still see agriculture as high-risk business venture? And what are the likely mitigating factors that could be provided for us to eventually get capital for this line of business?
So it's I live that word every day, I guess, especially in the Nigerian space. At least in my experience, I'd say one of the bigger challenges that we have when it comes to dealing with banks is how we interpret capital. We do interpret capital, or I'd say capital performance differently. The banks, I guess the Nigerian banks really do interpret capital performance differently. That comes with lack of understanding of the value chain itself. Most agribusiness, when you think about it, they are really long cycle projects. And when you think about it from an investor perspective, an investor wants quick return on their capital. So it's more of an opportunity cost of capital for the banks. So, I mean, you can, as an investor myself, right, if you really think about it, most investors want quick return on their money. So if I have to put my money in oil and gas versus in Agric, well, in today's world where oil price, given what's going on in Iran and the current geopolitics in the world, oil price has gone up about 20%. In Nigeria, the cost of an average agri product is probably deflated by 30 or 40%, right? So when you think about it, it makes sense from the bank's perspective to invest in oil and gas business because they will probably get their return on investment a lot faster than they will get in an agriculture space. So it's more of an investment decision for the banks. That's one piece of it. The other piece of it is that the credit framework, what I call the credit framework in the country, needs to be vastly improved. The data perspective of it is a real challenge for the banks. There is no data that can track a farmer, the credit history, and the repayment history all the way down. So essentially, the bankers do not understand their customers. They do not understand business, and they do not understand their customers. So, and there are not enough data in that space to sort of leverage that understanding. And I think that's something that that I think some IT company can pick up, to ensure that that connect is being made between the farmers and the bankers. So there's a lot more understanding of the industry and also the customers. The other piece of it, which I think is high risk, for the banks. Again, I'm not a banker. I'm not speaking for the banker, but I'm also being fair in my assessment. If I was on the other side of the equation, the risk perception of agriculture is quite high, and security is a big piece of that, in today's world. If a banker is loaning money to the farmers and the farmers cannot guarantee the products gets to the market within the year cycle due to security challenges, then it's a high risk venture for them as well. So there's quite a few things that really need to be looked at. It's a big I'd say it's a big conundrum that really needs to be unpacked layer by layer, and every one of us, as a country, have a role to play in that. The individuals with the trust factors to make sure that we're able to meet our obligations when we pay back. The banking infrastructure needs to improve vastly, and the government also needs to help with the security basis and also provide the right infrastructure for the banks to be able to incentivize them to ensure that they're able to loan money to large scale farmers or folks in the agribusiness. So there's quite a few challenges here that I think needs to be resolved.
Okay, thank you so much for your fair assessment, of why banks still see the agribusiness as a high-risk venture. To our global audience, we'll be going on a short break, but just to drop a reminder, if you're joining us, just tell us where you're joining us from, and do remember to drop your comments and questions. And when we come back from the break, our guests will still be with us. Stay tuned and see you on the other side.
He knows what it takes to succeed.
She has the skill to move financial mountains.
So can you with ICAN and the CGMA designation.
She has the confidence to lead finance in Nigeria.
He's ready to become a finance leader.
So can you with ICAN and the CGMA designation.
All right, welcome back to your program, our program, ICAN-ngr. And you have been listening to the voice of the CEO of 365 Farms, Olatunji Abioye, and we've been looking at different opportunities in the Agric Value Chain. Let's quickly see our audience who have joined us on this program. Nurudin Olawale Ogunlano, Vincent Ahabua, I have Akintunde Temitope Sonyaolu, Dr. Biyaminu Tijani, Fagbola Temitope Adeniyi. We also have Albert Joshua, Igora Williams, Uzechukwu Marizu, Stephen Huti, Jacob Arinzi, all the way from Port Harcourt, River State. We have Akinyemi Yanuluwa Isheoluwa, Shimawa, Pastor Oladega FCA, watching us live from Shimawa in Ogun State. We have Shafe Ozavize. We have Chukwemeka Iziali. Also on this call, we have Adam Samuel and a whole lot of others who have joined us on this program. Please don't forget to send in your questions. Our guest is right here to answer your questions. Thank you very much once again for joining us on this program, our guest on the show. Okay, so still moving ahead in the topic, building economic resilience, opportunities in the Agric Value Chain. From where we stopped, as a widely traveled and experienced professional that you are, what are some of the low capital entry strategies that professionals wishing to diversify into agriculture should acquaint themselves with?
Well, you know, I'd say low capital is subjective, so depends on how you want to approach that. Low capital to somebody else is 100 million. To some people is a billion. So it just depends on it's quite subjective. So, but anyway, you know, from 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 a capital investment perspective, right? If obviously if I were to do this again, as a professional, if I were to try to get into this business today, you know, I I take a part of going directly into the midstream value chain. That's that'll be my strategy. Um, like I talked about, the midstream is the storage and logistics piece of it, right? I think there's a massive underinvested that's a I'd say that area is massively underinvested in when we talk about about the agric value chain. Um, and the reason why I say that is largely because of the lack of infrastructure to support the industry. There's, we talk about storage facilities, we talk about, product logistics, we talk about I'd say first layer of processing. There's something we call first layer of processing, and I might elaborate a little bit on that. So, for example, I've got we produce cassava at a large scale. That's one of our bigger crops, and I'll use it as a basic example. It's not quite so processing cassava to, let's say, from cassava to flour or starch is not quite the finished product. However, there are small entry level processing that can actually be harnessed, which I still classify as part of the midstream component. It's a pre-processing of the cassava itself, and those are they're not as capital intensive as trying to build a full scale processing facility, but they are very high value projects, meaning your return on investment to investment ratio is quite high. Essentially, your capital PI, and you guys are the finance folks, is quite high. And that's why I'll focus on that aspect of the business. Really, again, it's what I call pre-processing. You don't and what that does for your product is that it prevents you from it buys you more time on shelf life of your product. So if I was to reinvest, that would be my investment strategy, is to really go into that midstream section, what I call pre-processing. It's not quite the logistics piece of it, because logistics can be quite challenging as well in the Nigerian environment, from having the right professionals and also, of course, dealing with the typical nuances of doing business in Nigeria. But the pre-processing phase really gets you out of that out of the whole the regular day-to-day challenges of doing business in Nigeria. But that doesn't come without its challenges. I think the first stage of doing that would be to be able to aggregate, right? To be able to aggregate farmers and do pre-processing for them, and before you actually take those products to the big processors. But that to me is one area in which a lot of new entrants can actually leverage. Farming is difficult. If you ever think about it from a perspective of just farming is quite difficult. I mean, the base primary farming, it's a very difficult venture, especially if you are trying to do that scale. If you're trying to do something in your backyards, absolutely, it's probably easy venture. But if you're trying to do for profit, it's quite challenging. And the pre-processing phase really is going to save you a lot of headaches, best capital productivity or best capital efficiency is what I'll call it, and probably more rewarding, in my opinion, because you're able to help out the farmers who have zero options on who are trying to increase the shelf life of their products, and also you're also supplying that to the big companies. So it's very rewarding.
Exactly.
Our strategies, that's where I'll invest my money from a low capital standpoint.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Abioye. I am gaining a lot of insights, and to our global audience, I hope you have too. Earlier, you had mentioned that one of the things that drove you into agribusiness is a sense of responsibility, and I think you also mentioned the fact that it was a retirement plan for you. So I would like to ask, based on your practical and professional experience, what financial models, whether be it private equity, venture capital, or even blended finance, do they uniquely take the Nigerian agricultural ecosystem into consideration when they package some of these financing deals, as it were? Are they available, and do you think they are tailored for agribusiness?
Well, like we talked about earlier on, I'd say in the current banking space today, or current finance space today in Nigeria, it's underserved. When I say underserved, it's not as available out there. What are the bigger challenges? And I do have young farmers that I actually mentor, and I'll say one of the bigger challenges that we have as an industry is the trust factor, right? And that trust is largely driven by many other outside components or outside uncontrollable events like fire, security, and those things, right? So, I mean, there's that piece of it. So when we talk about, capital products and blended financing and things like that, they are available, but they are underserved. I'd say our industry, they are quite underserved. Now, one of the things we've leveraged is co-venturing. There are various ways you can actually raise capital, which I think that's sort of where you're going with your question is how are we able to access more capital, if we don't go to the conventional banks, right? If that's a challenge, how do we access more capital from the private equity firms or the general public at large? If you remember, there was a time back in 2021, there was a ton of finance poured into our Greek space, where some companies were promising 200% rate of return in 3 months or in 4 months. So there is that element of bad blood that still resides in that private equity space, because of undelivered promises. So that private equity space, they're still a little shy of wanting to go back into our industry. They think it's still fairly high risk. The capital blended funds are available. They come at a very high price. So in today's world, if I was to raise, I don't think I'd approach that right now. If I was to go back if I was to invest in the agri space, it's just the cost of capital is just too high for what I call my sort of risk tolerance. From an advice perspective, I'd say, the still best funded funds out there is probably still the government funding is still the best one. If you can get your hands on them, they're still the best funding out there. They do have, I'd say, also leverage on China. China is actually one of the better countries to leverage. They do have a lot of cheap funding available right now. I don't know if you know much about the Chinese market. They are going through a phase of what we call deflation right now. And as an industry, I think what we really need to do is to leverage that. What I mean by that is that the productivity is so good that they're able to output a lot of processing equipment, at a faster rate that they can actually sell them, right? So they are willing to do some in-house blended finances for new entrants into the market, and they are fairly a lot better rates than that you probably get in the private equity market than you get in the conventional banking industry. So those are things that new entrants to the market can actually leverage.
Exactly, exactly. I agree with you. Let's also look further again into this area that I would say concerns standard accountants, uh, who forms the audience that we're actually speaking to. So on this agric value chain that we've been talking about, in what ways can professional accountants contribute in strengthening transparency and accountability across the agric value chain? That's the first part. And then the second part is that what skills or services are currently lacking in this space, which accountants can position themselves to provide.
Okay. As far as I think I'll take your second question first, then I'll take your second question. Just hope I didn't forget it. But your first question, I guess your second question is when we talk about the accounting space. What is heavily lacking for us is you talk about transparency, and I'm going to try to relate this to the banks as well as you talk about financing. Tejiri talked about financing. That's one piece of of the industry that's sort of lacking, right? And we talk about documentation and the right information for the financiers to provide this finance to you. They require certain things, which is your books has to be cleaned, audited finances, and things like that, right? Taxes. So all those, all those, I'll say all the typical frameworks that you call for a typical company, that's largely lacking for most corporate farmers. And when you talk about the opportunities, that's where, like I said earlier on, is it would be nice if we had accountants that are actually experts in Agric. I know we have. I mean, I've worked with some oil and gas accountants, and all they know is actually oil and gas. I've worked with some accountants. All they know is law. It would be nice to actually have some specialized accountants in this area because we really do need help as an industry. Clean of our books, understanding, like I talked about, understanding, the interpretation of the agri finance in Nigeria. We're doing our best to do as much as we can, but it's an area that's greatly underserved. We could use a lot of professionals in that area, specialized professionals. I'm talking about that. I mean, at least I have in my network of peers or of friends and co-investors. This is one specific area that we do lack, we do struggle with, is how do we engage the accountants? How do we value our assets? Like things like valuation. We don't even understand those critical frameworks properly. So there is a lot that you guys can do. You guys in the accounting side can actually do for us from a service perspective. So, but anyway, that's my thoughts on on your second question. But like I said, if you maybe I'm also doing some advertising here as an accountant. If you're looking for if you wanted to take extra gigs as tax accountants for 365 Farms, we would like to talk to you.
That's a good one. That's a good one for us. All right.
Okay, so thank you so much for the advert. We have a question from one of our viewers, Olatunji Abioye, and he or she is asking, in an era where young Nigerians are jackpying into drug addiction and Yahoo, in their own words, have you considered, as the corporate organization, building agricultural capacity, amongst the young Nigerians? Do you have something like that in the works?
So, yeah, I talked about earlier on that one of the main drivers for wanting to invest in agriculture for us is a sense of responsibility. And one thing that we leverage a lot in oil and gas, and one of the experience that I've brought over from oil and gas to agriculture is, we have to build a community. And one of the things we do at 365 Farms is that we hire 99% of, I'd say 95% of who are employees actually from the neighborhood where we operate. Essentially, if for our farms in Shaki or Ogun State, 95% of everybody that operates in that locality, that operates in that branch, actually live and are from that area. So one of the things we and you talked about immigration earlier on, right? I think immigration from the bigger cities from the rural areas and bigger cities, right? That's one of the ways in which we feel like we're able to stem that migration. Really is, and I talked about a sense of responsibility, right? Some of the other things we're doing is we have blended fundings with some corporate entity grants in which we use to empower some of the local youths, again, to make sure they are actively contributing to the growth of the country in their own little way. We engage NYC graduates that we allow to come into our company as paid interns. And so essentially we are actually doing our part. So there are different programs we've put in place to support young professionals. I wouldn't say, I would say, the jackpot part of it. I migrated 26 years ago, so it's been a long time for me. And knowing what I know today, would I still make the same move? I'd say it's subjective, so it's unfair for me to say, hey, don't go anywhere when I'm actually lived in that same lifestyle. So, but one thing I would like to iterate is that, there are a lot of opportunities in Nigeria, and it takes a lot of grit and resilience to stay behind. I want to develop those opportunities. The journey of it is not going to be smooth. However, it is definitely worth it. Just like every industry, you have to grow your way into ensuring that you have to grow your way into developing or into whatever financial goal you're trying to reach in any industry, right? I'd say my young self, I was advise my young self again, knowing what I know now. If I told folks that I'll stay behind, they'll probably, but I probably will stay behind, and chase the opportunities there. That's my opinion. It's fair for anyone to judge and take that advice as they see fit, but there are definitely opportunities in the agri space that could stem the jackpot, that could actually beat whatever it's being offered outside the country.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much. Our time is fast spent, and just within 1 minute, I will want to put this final question to you. Assuming our President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR, I invite you to speak to his economic team on opportunities in the Agric Value Chain. What exactly would you be telling Mr. President?
I'll focus my response to the president on sustainability. I think sustainability is pretty much in one statement. I'll tell Mr. President, are we building a sustainable economy? And I think that's one thing that we've seen as investors and as citizens is, we talked about adaptability earlier on. You think about adaptability and sustainability; they go hand in hand, right? Are we adapting to various situations? Are we sustainable? Are we able to sustain our own growth? Our population is growing. How do we feed this population, this growing population, right? The key thing to ensure is whatever policies we put in place is sustainable. The government, I'd say over the last couple of years, they've done a lot to help the Agric to try to stem the inflation in food production. However, it's not. I generally do not think whatever policies they have going is sustainable enough. That's a personal perspective, but I think I would advise the president to focus more on sustainable policies that helps both the value chain and also the population. We have two different needs, but looking for the same outcome.
All right, you may get your invite very soon.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Olatunji Abioye, the CEO of 365 Farms. We want to thank you so very much for coming to the show ICAN-ngr, and also for speaking to the members of the Institute. We have actually learned so much from you in this last 50 minutes thereabouts. You have delved so much on the opportunities in the Agric Value Chain. And we hope that when next we call upon you, you answer our call. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tosin. Mr. Tejere, thank you very much. It's a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you
The
so
pleasure
much.
is ours. Do have a lovely evening.
You too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Okay, so let's quickly take our announcements on the show tonight. Tejere, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tosin. So we have a couple of announcements. The first is that registration for the March 2026 diet of ASWA is currently ongoing. The exam date has been scheduled for Tuesday, 24th and Wednesday, 25th of March, 2026. Of course, the exam dockets will be available for download as from Sunday, 22nd of March, 2026 on the Institute's website. Our great institute is also calling for submission of papers for the 11th International Academic Conference on Accounting and Finance. And then the deadline for abstract and submission has been extended to March 10th, 2026. And then for the full paper, March 15th, 2026. And there's a special highlight for the PhD stroke MSc Colocom. There's a best paper prize of 300,000. More information you can get in terms of submission. You could do that at research and technical at ican.org.ng. And then all paper presenters will earn 16 MCPD credit hours. Last but not least, registration for the May 2026 diet of the Institute's professional examination is ongoing and it will close on May 14th, 2026. Exam date has been scheduled for May 19th to Tuesday, May 19th to Thursday, May 21st, 2026. Oh, we still have another one. Nominations are still open for the 2026 ICAN Merit Award by our institute. This occasion honors and celebrates outstanding contributions by members, non-members, young professionals, and corporate organizations. You're advised to visit our website for guidelines, award categories, and slots that are available. There's also important notice to ICAN members. You are asked to, or we're asked to remind you to keep your annual subscriptions up to date. Okay, and that members who remain in default for 2 consecutive years risk suspension, while those in default for 3 consecutive years may be delisted from the Institute's register. So you are advised to regularize all of your subscription issues on or before March 31st, 2026. Okay, so there's also a celebration of legacy, leadership, and lasting impact at the ICAN 60th anniversary golf tournament. And that golf tournament will be holding at the Keja Golf Club on Friday 10th and Saturday 11th April 2026. And then there's a big one as well, the 25th ICAN Fellowship Conferment Ceremony, which is the hallmark of your rise in this institute, okay, who is also coming up at the Federal Palace Hotel, Victoria Island, Lagos, on the 2nd of May, 2026. Time is 11 a.m. You're asked to visit the Institute's website for more details. That's all from the announcement side. Tosin, over to you.
All right, Tejere, thank you very much. Before we go, in the course of the week, we have some of our finest being appointed and elected to offices. We want to celebrate and congratulate Mr. Taiwo Idele, FCA, on his nomination as the Minister of State for Finance. We celebrate you. And of course, we also rejoice with Dr. Muyiwa Adetola, FCA, on his appointment as the Accountant General of Lagos State. In the same vein, we also rejoice with Mr. Tola Adeyemi, FCA, of course, being the CEO KPMG of Africa. And also, we also celebrate our own Mr. Yomi Olugbenro, FCA, on his election as the CEO-elect of Deloitte West Africa. Not forgetting Mrs. Onyeka Amarakate, also on our appointment as the Executive Director at Anambra State IRS. We celebrate with you all, and we wish you greater heights in your endeavor. Of course, we also reflect on the news of the demise of Professor Kabiru Issa Dandogo, a reputable professor of this profession. May the Lord rest his soul and then comfort the family. On this note, we'll draw a curtain to this program for today. I remain Tosin Akinomi, FCA, saying thank you for watching and bye for now.
Thank you, and it's goodbye from my side. I'm Kemute Tijiri, FCA. See you next time.